Rachael Wyse-Mason, co-founder of the D.R.M. Deliverance and Restoration Ministry, alongside with my husband, D.R.M. Mason. Welcome to our self-deliverance session number 2. So this is where we start our recognition, and we're going to have about 3 videos where we're going to be identifying the open doors that may be existent in our lives. So I'll go through a lengthy list with explanations, and you can see if those doors would apply to you or not. So before we start, check out the links below. You need to check out our recognize, our repent, our renounce videos, as well as the orientation video and introduction to self-deliverance before you start this video. So let's get started. Let's get cozy. Get your pen and your paper. You need to make some notes about things you recognize, and we're just gonna get cozy up a little bit, and just make sure that this is like a personal thing. It's just yourself, God, and me on your device, and we're just gonna go through this. There is no shame. There is no embarrassment. There is no condemnation. We here is just to bring conviction and to expose the enemy where he is existing in your life. So we're going to start with recognizing the open door. Please remember that you can only do this for yourself. In this session, we'll be covering generational curses and childhood traumas. So generational curses is where you recognize that there's a cycle or a repeating pattern of sin or lack or curses that starts off from 3-4 generations before it could be traced into your own life. Now, we have extended videos on generational curses, links below. If you want an extended version of what these generational curses are like, please take a look of those videos before starting this session here. So I'm going to describe to you a list of things that you would be able to recognize. Now, when we're dealing with generational curses, we are only dealing with your family. You can look at your immediate in terms of your parents, your siblings, but we also want you to extend beyond that. Look at your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your uncles, your aunties, your cousins. If you can go that far, that would be great. Now, some of you may be adopted, or you may not know your family well. That is quite fine. So what we're going to do is, when you do the renunciation and the repentance and the deliverance prayer, you're just going to repeat everything just in case. Yeah? Okay, so what are some of the patterns and some of the cycles or the repeated trends that we can see occurring in our family from one generation to the other? So the first thing is limitation. Now, when we talk about limitation, we talk about lack, not living full potential, whether it be financially, whether it be education-wise, whether it be in business, right? So do you see a pattern of limitation in your family? Do you find that, there's a spirit of poverty, where you find that, nobody owns their own home? Everyone either rents or lives by someone. Do you find that there's a limitation with education? So persons, they don't reach past, say, CXC A levels. They have the persons that actually do the degrees or go further than that. Do you find that your family tend to have jobs and versus careers, where they just living like paycheck to paycheck, from hand to mouth? Do you find that there's a spirit of limitation with your family? If you find that this is existing, then most likely your family may be actually battling a spirit of limitation. And if you yourself are struggling with limitation, it could be one of the reasons why that is occurring in your life. So if you find that there's a spirit of lack or limitation, when you check in your family, you're observing this, please make a note of limitation on your paper. Next, we want to be looking at sicknesses and disease. So As we had explained in generational curses, that there are times when acts are actually committed in the generations that go on before, and because there must be a penalty for sin, those in the generation after, they bear the penalty of those actions in the form of a curse. And this can also occur through sickness. So the type of sicknesses that we look at are things that tend to pass on a generational line. Things like high blood pressure, diabetes, things like cancer. So, like I could tell you, for example, this is where, we had to take the mask off a little bit. So I'm going to take my mask off. So for example, like my family, we were dealing with a generational curse of cancer. I can tell you about 6 relatives, and I'm talking about like immediate from my grandparents, my aunties, uncles, parents, in terms of dealing with that spirit of cancer. So 6 relatives, and that let me recognize that we were dealing with a generational curse of cancer. So one of the first things that I did in dealing with generational curse is to break those cycles, to denounce those spirits over my life, and you can do it over your life as well. So some of these things, you're gonna have to ask mommy, ask granny, ask the auntie and uncles, and talk to them, have a conversation. I remember I did this like a couple years ago where my grandmother came to visit, and my grandmother, you just have to get us started, and my grandmother would just keep going. She passed away recently, and I'm so glad that I grasped the opportunity to really investigate our family line. And I asked a lot of questions about different things and what happening, what is occurring. And when she left, I had like a long list of generational curses to break. So I'll encourage you to ask questions. Even if you don't know after this session, go find out and then come back and listen to the video again and get the answers that you need. But we're going forward with dealing with generational curses. So in addition to sickness, you maybe also have to examine to see if there may be cases of mental illnesses in your family. Has anyone in your family been committed or have to go to St. Anne's or Ward 1? Has anyone have to take medication for bipolar or schizophrenia and anything like that? If that may be occurring in your family, it may be a generational curse that you will have to deal with as well. Our next curse is the spirit of substance abuse and addictions. So, is there a pattern of alcohol, of addictions in your family? And when we talk about addictions, we talk about things like alcoholism. We're talking about like gambling, smoking, drugs, cocaine, weed, marijuana, that kind of thing. So if there's a pattern of addictions in your family, please make a note of it and what the addiction actually is. Now, alcoholism tends to be a very common one that we deal with in Trinidad. You see it causing, being the root or the influencer when it comes to a lot of family disagreements, even for murders and killings that we have had recorded in our nation. A lot of it will influence with alcohol. If you find there's a pattern of alcoholism in your family, make a note of it. If it's like your grandfather was an alcoholic, like my grandfather was an alcoholic. If you find like your grandfather, your aunties, uncles, you have cousins, you have siblings, your parents, your father, if there's this trend of alcoholism or gambling or any type of addiction, please make a note of it on your paper. The other type of curse that we will be dealing with is witchcraft. Now, witchcraft usually happens in like 2 forms. It's either that persons did witchcraft on your family or your family themselves practice witchcraft, right? I would remember that my grandmother and my auntie would talk about waking up and finding a bag with a dead frog, and the mouth of the frog is crushed and the mouth is tied with names written on paper in the frog mouth. I call this Vinci witchcraft, right? Meaning that, it was actually from a neighbor that was targeting our family. So, have you ever heard stories or heard anyone in your family talk about witchcraft being done to them? If that is the case, then some of the issues that you may be struggling with may be from an act of witchcraft that is passing on the generational line. The other form is where your family themselves committed witchcraft. And there are cases where if witchcraft is done in your family and based on some advice they would have given, they would have tried to protect or seal themselves by performing witchcraft. Or there are some persons who families actively get themselves involved into witchcraft. If that is the case, we would ask you to write it down. Has your family ever talked about going by somebody for a reading, or bringing anyone into the house to do a kind of prayer? And it's not the kind of Jesus prayer where you have a prayer meeting. It's kind of like where they bring somebody and they write chalk on the walls, or they smoke out the house. So, if you have any of these type of memories being passed over fires and all these different things, if you have any of these type of memories, or anyone in your family mention these things, they talk about lighting candles, and or you could or you still have family members that practice these things, please make a note of witchcraft as one of the generational curses that you have to deal with. Now, the spirit of witchcraft is one that is persons tend to not understand how strong that the spirit of witchcraft, the effect that it can actually have on generations that come down. In one of the videos concerning curses, I had mentioned this when I had dealt with generational curses. That is in session 1, series 2. Apparently, their grandparents had done witchcraft to get land, and he had offered his grandchild blood up in exchange for the land. I think it was maybe a Kali prayer or something like that they had mentioned. Now, this grandchild is the person who I met who came for the deliverance, and they were experiencing 3 days where demons were talking through them just when they were about to start their university life. And the demons were actually saying that they gained access to her life because the grandfather did witchcraft, and her blood was given in exchange, and they came to claim what was theirs. And it was really, really a sad case because she did not perform the witchcraft herself, yet she was going through the limitation, the restrictions, having issues to study, to focus, having constant health issues, and she herself did not do the witchcraft, yet she was dealing with the consequences of it. So please don't underestimate the acts of witchcraft in your family. Know that if these things are actually occurring, that you have to give these things over to Jesus to make sure that the enemy has no claim on you when it comes to those acts. The other one is idolatry. So idolatry is when there is a history of idol worship in your family. And in Trinidad and Tobago, that usually comes under the three main categories. Now, unfortunately, I can't be too politically correct when it comes to these things, and it's by no means no condemnation or anything. We're just speaking it as it is. So in Trinidad, we deal with this when it comes to persons in the Hinduism faith, where they worship idols. We deal with this when it comes to even the Baptist faith, because some of them do integrate like family idols and stuff like that into their worship. And we deal with it as well when it comes to Catholicism, right? When they deal with idolism, with the IHS, and dealing with Jesus and statues and stuff like that of Jesus. So that spirit of idolism is where it is we give our worship unto an idol. And most of these cases, as the Apostle Paul had spoken, they're actually demons that are operating behind these idols. So if there's a history of idolism, of false religion within your family, then that may actually be given room for the enemy to operate in your own life. So if you know there's idolism, please make a note of idolism and make it clear to yourself which type of idolism you're dealing with. So when we do the renunciation, you will know exactly where your prayer would lie. Next, our next spirit we'll be dealing with is the spirit of abuse. And when we say abuse, we are talking about physical abuse, we're talking about verbal abuse and sexual abuse. Now, we naturally tend to find patterns of when it is that abuse occurs in a family. It does tend to pass itself on to generations after. Particularly if there's like physical abuse, we tend to find that if fathers are abusive, daughters tend to marry abusive men, or sons themselves become abusers. Now, again, if you want further information on how these generational curses work, please check out our link below with generational curses dealt with the D.R.M inspired channel. Now, when I think about sexual abuse, immediately I think about one of our earliest candidates. She was dealing with she came in because she was experiencing demonic attacks. She would actually feel like she's being raped and all these different things. And it's only for the investigation led us to realize that there was a long history of sexual abuse within her family. It started with her grandmother, and the grandmother, we had the privilege of speaking with her, and the grandmother revealed that she was raped by her own brother. And the grandmother, later on in life, she had a daughter, and then she got married to someone else. Not the daughter's father, she got married to someone else and had other children. She later revealed that her daughter and her husband, her first daughter and her husband, actually had a child together. So that child is not actually the candidate we deal with, is her sibling. So the mother had a child for her stepmother, and then she had other children, which include the candidate that we dealt with. I hope you guys are able to keep on track with this. Our candidate herself was then sexually abused by both of her uncles, that is her mother brothers. And she herself was going through a phase being abused by her uncles. So this candidate was actually experiencing attacks of feeling like she's being raped, and limitations and restrictions. So recognize that it's not just a matter of these things passing on and you yourself repeating these patterns. They can actually shut doors in your life, and they can actually cause a hindrance to different aspects or areas in your life that you want to be victorious in. Our next generational curse deals with sexual immorality. So this is where we find that our families don't have successful relationships or successful marriages. So what are some of the patterns that you would see? You tend to see a lot of broken marriages. You tend to see a lot of persons in your family either having premarital sex, premarital pregnancies, common law relationships. You find that persons who are married get separated, or there is adultery or cheating occurring within the marriage. There's a lot of divorce or separation. You tend to see the pattern of things like homosexuality and lesbianism. These are all signs if there may be a generational spirit of sexual immorality in your family. There are also occurrences of generational spouse spirits. Now, I will deal with a video on spouse spirit much later on in the time to come. But what we find with these generational spouse spirits is that they tend to pass themselves on, preventing marriages and causing marriages to be broken within a family line. So when you look at it, there are very few members in your family that actually have good marriages, and you yourself may actually be struggling to get married or stay married or be happily married. So if you find that there's that pattern or that trend in your family, please make a note of it in your paper. Now, there may be some generational curses that may be very unique to your family, and in that case, we will ask you to just take a note of it. Some of you may be experiencing things like there's a history of cults in your family, like persons in your family who are members of the lodge or anything like that. There may be persons who may be experiencing things like sicknesses in the womb. Persons in your family tend to have like fibroids or issues with fertility. I remember a case where a lady came and we did deliverance, and the demon said that all the women in the family actually struggle with pain and growth within their wombs of fibroids. There is another case, remember, where they came and all the young men in their family died before the age of 25 before having children themselves. So there may be some generational curses that is unique to your family. You take the time, examine, see what it is that's taking place, and if you recognize it, write it down so that when we're dealing with the renunciation, all your information is right there to break those curses. So now we want to deal with childhood traumas. Now, childhood traumas deal with incidences and things that happen in your childhood that will actually cause the enemy to attach himself to your life. So these usually come in the form of sexual abuse, rape, incest, physical abuse, and verbal abuse. So sexual abuse, as we know, tend to be usually intercourse between an adult and child. I want to expand your definition a bit on sexual abuse. Now, in deliverance, what we have learned is that all the demons need is actually one inappropriate touch in order to gain access to someone's life. So that would include inappropriate touching between an adult to child, but it also would include inappropriate touching from child to child. So think about it. Now, this is dealing with your personal life. So you're examining your life. Could you trace any time in your past where you were inappropriately touched by anyone, an adult, or by another child? Now, because this child-to-child sexual abuse occurs sometimes, parents call it vice and all these different things. We tend to advise parents to always be looking on when their children are playing. When there's a neighbor across, when their cousins come across to visit, always keep an eye on them, because usually children who are abused tend to play sexual games, and then this can pass on a spirit of lust to your child. So think about it. Have you ever been involved in or ever been inappropriately touched? What that will do is that will pass on a spirit of lust and introduce a spirit of lust into your life from a very early age. The other one is rape. Now, we know that rape is forced intercourse, but we're not just looking at just forced intercourse, we're also looking at attempted rape. So has anyone ever attempted to rape you before? Or have you ever been put in a position where you were raped, or an attempt of rape was made over your life? If that was the case, please make a note of rape over your life. Please make a note of rape on your paper, and we will deal with that when we deal with the renunciations. Our next item of childhood traumas deal with incest. Now, incest is sexual abuse or an inappropriate touch between one another, usually of the same family. Now, you may have made a note of it for sexual abuse, but if it is that it occur with family, please make a note of incest, and just to make sure that all the information is right at your fingertips for the renunciation, make a note of who it was. As far as you remember, was it an uncle, an auntie, or whoever it is? Please make a note. The other one is physical abuse. Now, physical abuse, we know could come in the form of excessive beatings or any form of beating that occurs from like a husband or from a wife or from parents. Now, typically, some of the things we deal with is that because as children we would have received what we call licks as discipline. All trainees believe that they were physically abused, but let's get real. So if you did the crime, you have to do the time. Now, correct discipline is where your time matches the crime. Abuse is where the time is excessive based on the crime. So let's say you were younger and you knocked over a bottle of water, plastic bottle, nothing broke, nothing spilled, but you were beaten until you were black and blue. That is abuse. So if you find that you were ever any adult, a husband, any boyfriend in a relationship or anything like that had hit you, if you find that you were even abused as a child, please make a note of physical abuse in your phone. The last one we would deal with is verbal abuse. Now, verbal abuse does include a lot of like when derogatory terms are used or obscene language, and a lot of curling and stuff like that is used against you, and it's usually designed to bring down your self-esteem. But we want to expand that version or that definition of verbal abuse a bit. When we look at verbal abuse, we look at word curses, and we do plan on doing a video on word curses at a later date. Now, word curses is where someone makes an evil declaration against you, and then demons go on assignment to fulfill those curses. What are some examples? So sometimes, and this is where, again, parents need to be so careful about the things they say to their children in anger, what we say to each other, spouses, and what persons would say. Things like, you're good for nothing. You will mount up to nothing. And anything you touch is just blight. You're only good to be on your back. I remember a lady was telling me that, she was in church and they tell her that they fed up here about her giving, and they say, we would live to see you lose your job. Any of these evil declarations spoken, demons go on assignment to fulfill these curses. So think back, was there any evil declaration made against you? Made to you from a parent, from family, friends, co-workers, even persons in church, loved ones? Did you make any evil declaration against yourself? So if it is that you fall into, if you remember any of these things, write down verbal abuse, but also make a note of what was said, so that when we deal with the renunciation, the exact curse that was said against you, you will have that information on hand to rebuke those curses and make sure that the demons sent on assignment, they get rebuked as well. So that wraps up our childhood curses, where you examined yourself. And so in this session, we covered our generational curses, we covered our childhood traumas. So this is our first session. So join me again where we'll be dealing with personal sin. Again, please share, like, subscribe, click the notification bell so that you can get our future videos. Please make your questions and your comments below. We'll be so happy to respond to them, to give you some clarification, and take note of our contact number for if you believe that you need further deliverance. So guys, stay tuned to our next video when we deal with personal sin.